No, that's not big enough. No, that's not big enough either. That's more like it. We're delighted to have you with us, and we...
Wake up! Good morning, West Army. This is Chase LeBron here, your wonderful host for the Good Morning Show, with my amazing co-hosts Nick Fleetwood, Stephanie Farnes, and Sophia Lynn. Today we're going to take a live look into the 70s era, which occurred almost 50 years ago, in case you were wondering. First off, I'll start with the economic issues that occurred, while Nick talks about Vietnam and the war. That lasted a little too long. And then Stephanie will talk about the pop culture for the young crowd out there. And lastly, Sophia Lynn will talk about Richard Nixon and the crazy Watergate scandal. Thank you. Welcome back, folks. This is Tracer Pearl here discussing the economics of the 1970s. The 1970s were perhaps the worst decade of most industrialized countries' economic performance since the Great Depression, and that was very bad. Adversely distinguishing itself from the prosperous post-war period between 1945 and 1973. Japan and West Germany overtook the U.S. in becoming leaders in the manufacturing industry, which the U.S. was a leader for a very long time. Oil shocks in 1973 and 1979 led to gasoline rationing, and ecological awareness rose substantially, affecting the economy. Ladies and gentlemen, what should we talk about next?
Tell me, man.
I'll tell you. Movements. And yes, feminism was still a big deal in the 70s. So, feminism led to a slight altering in the roles of women. Many began to hold prominent government positions, office roles, etc. You know the deal. And it also aimed for social equality and the repeal of oppressive acts.
Hey, that kind of relates to nowadays women's marches that fight for equal opportunities for women.
It totally does.
Yes, it does. I definitely agree.
Yeah, me too.
Secondly, the anti-war protesting in young adults across the country sparked the Kent State University shootings, which killed 4 and sadly injured 9. This was because these young adults were protesting over the ongoing Vietnam War, and like many young adults across the nation, they were pretty upset about it. Next, we'll talk about environmentalism, including my Patagonia hat I just bought, but Apollo 11 shaped a public willingness to preserve nature. The United States began to celebrate Earth Day.
Did you know in 1970 Richard Nixon started the EPA?
You hear that,
Which,
folks?
if you don't know what that is, the Environmental Protection Agency.
Crazy. And lastly, civil rights. It began to break down after its popularity in the 1960s. Blacks continued to look for protests, but they also began to isolate themselves from society, much like the Black Lives Matter movement today. So in all, the 70s were the women's turn in large group movements. Thank you. And now, my wonderful co-host Nick Fleetwood talking about Vietnam.
Thank you, Chase. To recap on how Vietnam started, look back at 1940 when Ho Chi Minh went to FDR and asked if he could look at the constitution that he was writing for Vietnam. He completely ignored him, and he ended up looking at Karl Marx and communism. This is how it all started, as the U.S. ended up entering Vietnam because France ended up leaving after World War II. During the 1970s, President Nixon wanted to increase the bombing in North Vietnam. That way, Vietnam would be pressured to leave. By the time of around 1973, U.S. troops were starting to be pulled out, mostly. And in 1971, going back, Nixon went to China for the first time. This was, I don't know, the first time anybody has ever went to the People's Republic of China.
Crazy.
Ever. I don't know when. And, you know, it was pretty cool. Then Nixon resigned because of some scandals that Sophia Lynn will be talking about. And Vietnam eventually, after the U.S., all the troops were pulled, was granted admission into the United Nations. And after the Cold War ended, Vietnam was left in communist hands.
Wow,
Interesting.
And that's a wrap, folks. Thank you, and soon we'll be back with Stephanie Farnes and the pop culture of the 1970s.
And now, a dance video with Chase LaPearl.
Talk with the music of the decade. If you listen to the music, you can see that the anxieties and the issues of the decade are just really reflected in the music. Now, the 70s, it was a time of the Vietnam War, racial tensions, inflation and unemployment, women's equality and environmental issues. And if you just examine the music and take a close look, you can see these all show through. One example would be Marvin Gaye's song, What's Going On? Now, this song really just questioned the whole decade, questioned what was happening during the time, what people thought of it. Another song that really took a great look at the women's movement would be Helen Reddy's I Am Woman. This song was powerful and it just showed the women. It showed their importance. Punk rock was also born during this decade. Yes! Punk rock was an outlet.
Really?
Punk rock was an outlet for the anxieties and the frustrations of all that was happening, all of the chaos during the time.
Chaos.
Jeez.
Too much.
Also, in addition to punk rock, it just thought of it, hip hop and rap, it just hit the mainstream during this time. 70s was a really tough time on cities with the unemployment, the population was on the rise. Yet in the streets, a story of just vitality and joy just was shown and was brought by hip hop.
What about disco?
70s isn't even the 70s without disco.
Very true. Disco affected fashion, culture, even film. Saturday Night Fever was really made disco popular, what's really brought it up.
Such a good movie.
Yeah, disco provided an escape from what Roger Ebert would call the general depression and drabness of the political and musical atmosphere of the 70s. We will hear from Sophia next when we come back from this short commercial break.
Good morning, America. Today I'm here to challenge you. Because there are millions and millions of dogs, cats, any type of animals out there that we need to save. For example, your sport. A wonderful, loving dog I found under a trash can 3 years ago. And trust me, he did not look like this. So whatever you're thinking, whatever you're doing right now, sit back and pull out your wallet. Because 1 penny can save any animal. So I'm gonna let sport go really quick. I'm gonna talk to you. What should we be doing? Why do we not care? Well, look at yourself and blame yourself. Yes, this is our fault. No, don't blame the animals. And this grin on my face, no. Blame us. So, just find a dog on the street and help it, okay? This is a serious matter we need to fix, or else those dogs you see in their homes will no longer be there, or anywhere. So I challenge you, America. Thank you. And we're back once again with, this time, Sophia Lynn talking about the politics of the 1970s.
So, to start off the politics of the 1970s, we have to talk about the Watergate scandal, which was a defining moment. So, several burglars were arrested inside the office of the Democratic National Committee, located in Watergate in Washington, D.C. This was no ordinary robbery because these robbers were actually connected to what detectives think was Richard Nixon's re-election campaign. They were caught while wiretapping phones and attempting to steal secret documents. The question that stumped most detectives for the entity of the 1970s was Nixon connected to this campaign, or this robbery, and was it even planned by him? This later led to the resignation in 1974 of Richard Nixon. In a televised address, President Richard Nixon announced his intention to be the first American president to resign from the White House. With rumors of impeachment and those proceedings underway for his involvement in Watergate, Nixon finally fell to the pressure of Congress and the public to step down from his position in the White House. Another major political move of the 1970s was Richard Nixon's trip to China. This was the first step in normalizing relations between the Communist People's Republic of China. This trip to Beijing was a week of pretty much just talks between Nixon and China's leader. And Nixon seemed an unlikely candidate to try and build this bridge between China and the United States because he's very vocal of the Cold War and condemning Harry S. Truman for losing China to the communists in 1949.
Well, that concludes our special broadcast of the 1970s, but before we go, we have one more special announcement to make.
The most important year, can't forget it, 1979, when Marty Johnson was born.
There you have it, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and have a amazing day. Thank you.